Assalamu alaikum. We are talking about the sanction regulations. As for concern, the sanctions regulation in this particular video will work about the uh, sanctions major player. We will talking about the major sanctions player, means the authorities, means the people who can impose the sanctions. So let's start from the very first one. So first of all, we would like to know, well, before that we're going toward the main sanction players, why companies bear too much expense to comply with the sanctions regulation, to why to conform and consume and bear the expense of meeting with the sanctions regulation and compliance with that. First of all, if companies are not doing so, they will have to face the serious penalties, means they might face the fine, penalties, even lockouts, and not you can say the major loss they bear, the loss of the repute in the business world, because they are not taking care of the humanities, they are not taking care of the peace in the world, and their method of business is reckless and careless. So therefore they bear these expenses. First of all, the risk based approach is being adopted, and they follow a risk based approach by which they are making ensure that they are not working with the entities who are involved in terrorist activities, or they are indirectly are directly giving benefit to the people who are disturbing the world in this sense, like the activities of money laundering and terrorist activities. So another thing which is important is that who is the subject to sanctions, who is going to act upon, who is comply with that. So any person who has to must comply, who are the citizen of a state, like if you are in a USA, you must act upon and you must obey the law which are made by the US government. Secondly, you see that the companies who are working and entities individual must comply with the law made by their state, means if they are living or they are a citizen of United States, they must work accordingly. Another example is that if you are in a European Union, so then you have to obey the sanctions or work according to the sanctions imposed by the European Union. So the first example is that US citizen, and if they are their permanent resident, they has to obey that and they have to comply with the law. US companies, organization registered under US law, and if you are not citizen, you are physically present in USA, or your company or its any branch is working in USA, or US companies branch working outside the USA, must act accordingly and obey the sanctions and follow the regulation given by the United States. And as for concern with the European Union, the person and organization under the law of a member state, means the European Union is consisted of a number of states. Till the last we can say approximately 25-26 members are there of the European Union, and each of the member comply with the sanctions laws, or in the European Union they use the terminology of restrictions. So they must according to the restriction imposed by the European Union. So When we are move towards the next, now we are moving towards the main topic, and main topic is the major sanction players. Major sanction players is, first of all, is a FATF, we call FATF. Second one is UNO sanctions, and US OFAC, Office of Foreign Assets Control, and European Commission decision on restrictions, because as I have already told you that the in European Union sanctions are pronounced as restrictions, but none of the matter is different than the, you can say there is nothing different, like this is just like the sanctions, work sanctions. So in an other way you can see it in like that, the types of sanctions we can say. These are primary sanctions, and sometimes primary and secondary sanctions we cover in the next area. Imposed on, or we can say on the organization. Sanctions mean imposed on the organizations or on the state. So primary sanctions imposed on the, particularly on the states. And United Nations resolutions, means these are the law which is imposed through the United Nations regulations, and USA sanctions and European Union restrictions. This is another way to see the same picture. So these are the ways, or these are the methods of imposing sanctions. So if we are talking about the success of the sanctions, how we can see that sanctions will be successful, or they are moderately successful. This is all related with some, depends on some factors. So success criteria for sanctions: number one, if a big country or a big economic power impose sanctions, it will be more effective. More big economic power. A general rule expressed over here that its GDP is 10 times more than the targeted country. It means that it should be a big economic power, so it has a control on financial assets. It has control on financial assets. Number one. Number two, it will be more effective if the imposing country is closest to the target country. In this way, it can better supervise the things and understand the cultural and other structural issues related with that. If imposed by a large country, large group of countries, imposed by a large country means big country like USA, and large group of country means it is not a one country, it is a group of country, and they are imposing sanction in a unionized way, unanimously on consensus based sanctions imposed on a particular entity. Imposed by a developed country. Developed countries are more influential as compared to other countries, means they have more influence on international controlling agencies, they have more control on the other countries who are being in relationship of the particular country who are imposing, on whom you are imposing the sanctions. And similarly, if it is another entity, the influence work more. So therefore, if imposing country is a developed country, it will have more control on technology, knowledge, and trade. So therefore, it's more effective. Imposed by a country on which rely by the target country. If target countries rely on that particular country who is imposing it, likewise the countries like Pakistan is more dependent in their defense armament on America, as their major fighter is F-16, which is made by Lockheed Martin, American company, and other lot of things are based on, likewise import of wheat or food are related with that. So influence is more than that. Similarly, some of the Middle East countries like Iraq, based on the dependent for the technology and other issues. So it will be more influential. And seventh is an international sport like globalization work together. For example, you see international sport means the whole international community is in the favor of these restrictions, so then it's work more. The last one is a cutting line from all ends. If a country is being controlled the resources from all of neighboring and closing regional countries, the sanctions will work more effectively. So we will find more effective. So this is one of the success criteria related with the sanctions. Now we are talking about, so up till now we talked about the success criteria of the sanctions. We talked about the sanctions major players, and we have talked about the who is subject to sanctions, and companies why bear so much expense to meet the sanctions regulation. So these are the topic going through up till now. So now we are interested to know about the imposition of sanctions. So sanctions are imposed in two major ways. One of the way is the autonomous sanctions. So in autonomous sanction, an individual government or a single government imposed sanctions autonomously means it is not get support from any other country, it is not get from any other country, it's imposed by its autonomous decisions. We can say it is unilaterally by any government. Likewise, Australian government imposed sanctions. Sometimes we called it a single authority, like a single government, like United States, and they impose the sanctions. And similarly, you see United Kingdom. These are the one country, individual country. Australia, America, and United Kingdom impose the sanctions. And somewhere little like coalition government. Coalition government means government is one, but colluded with the you can say the collective government of few states, like European Union makes some sort of coalition government, and this is also included in the autonomous sanctions. As for concern with the multilateral sanctions are imposed by more than one government, means is a group of government imposed, and obviously it is greater impact and it has a greater influence because it is not unilateral, it's a multilateral impact. So imposed by more than one country. So it is imposed by more than one country, not only a single. So therefore its influence is more. So we can say it is more effective than the autonomous sanctions. So these are the two major categories when we are imposing the sanctions: a single state imposing the sanctions and multilateral sanctions. Now we are talking about an agency who is going to impose the sanctions. We called it FATF. FATF is established in 1989 by G7 countries. Initially its objective was only one focused objective, and that was money laundering. Means the money earned from illegal sources should not be converted or washed out and make it a legitimate money. So the initial working was to stop that the money earned from corrupted sources, money earned from illegal sources, money earned from theft and other crimes should not be converted into a laundered money, or it should not be converted into a legitimate money. But the condition of the world is totally changed after 9/11. So after 9/11, FATF added in its mission, and they have added to control the terrorist activities and stop the terrorist finance from different sources, so that to ensure the peace of the world and take care of humanitarian approach. So therefore they started the uh, working on the mission or working on the target to stop the terrorist sport. So they have initially developed two lists. One list is called blacklist countries and other is known as grey list countries. If we say what is the difference between blacklist countries and grey list countries, blacklist country is Iran and Korea, and this is, you can say, if we are taking care of these sort of countries are being further more stopped, and you can say strict sanctions are imposed on them. Strict sanctions are imposed. Their trade is almost banned. Their financial support and their financial resources are being freezed, and their flow of financial resources are very much limited. On the other hand, the grey list countries are those countries who are, you can say, working well with the all of the sanctions, and they are supporting well, but there are little loophole in their working. For example, there are some insufficient working or deficiency in their support or effort to stop the money laundering and money flow towards terrorists, and therefore they are included in the grey list. Pakistan remained for till the last year in the grey list, and it has loses important international fund resources flow to the country, and there are a lot of financial and economic implication of it. Lose a big amount of almost $10 billion of US aid, and that cause a serious damage to the normal flow of their economy. So, but with the effort, a grey list country can be be removed from this list and included into the normal countries. So, how a country being assessed and being included in a blacklist country or included in the grey list countries, this is very interesting. So, what is the assessment criteria? How a country is being included in that? First of all, and secondly, the ways to remove it. And if you find out the assessment criteria, so these are the same steps. If you take care of a country, it can remove from this list. First of all, assessment is done on the regulatory requirements. How a country is working on the regulatory requirement according to UN resolutions and the other procedures which are adopted by the world, and more than that, international cooperation for sanction regime, that country is supporting to the other institutions and supporting to the other world for in this regard. This is also important. And then the assessment is being done by the mutual report of the members of FATF, and they prepare the report, we can say the recommendation of them. So, how they observe that a country is being cooperating with the international institutions, working according to regulation and meeting the requirement, and work with the supervisory and support to the supervisory framework, and make a supervisory framework for its whole financial system to control the asset movement inside the country, so that the flow of funds towards terrorist activities, illegal activities, money laundering is stopped, and then implementation of the FATF recommendations. We have famously listened that there are 40 FATF recommendations are given in this regard. So, how much work is done on it? how much activity is made by this particular country. So based on this report, it is decided that the country should not be included in the grey list, and if it is in the grey list, should not included that, it should be excluded, or it should be included in the blacklist countries. So these are the ways to understand it. So there are, I have already explained that there are 40 different recommendations given by FATF. But in this particular topic, I will discuss only the 6th recommendation of the FATF, which is related with this topic. So why this is being made? This recommendation is made particularly for the rule of law, created an environment in which people respect the laws and regulation, and to protect the innocent parties, innocent people in all the world over. So these are the major reason, are the, you can say, the motive behind the 6th recommendation. So the first of all, they are willing to stop the funds and flow of resources to terrorist organization and disturb terrorist and countries where poor law and order due to control of terrorists. So first of all, stop the funding toward terrorists, and secondly, restrict or being totally control the flow of resources to the countries where there is poor law and order, terrorists are active, and they are the safe havens for the terrorists. So basic things, what are the basic things? First of all, required to implement that implementation of the targeted UN sanctions. So UN sanctions are the superlative law, which is mean mother of the all laws made inside the countries. So UNO sanctions must be implemented targetedly. Secondly, focus on encountering the terrorist financing. By any means, stop the movement of capital and flow of resources towards terrorists, and intended assistance in sanction implementation means all effort to support those activities which are ensuring the sanction implementation. So this is what the 6th recommendation means. A country should made an environment, made a particular scenario in which people thought that they are working under some controls, and they have to work according to some rules and regulations. They respect the laws and peace and order for the world, and ensure that the sanctions must be implemented, and flow of capital and flow of financial resources should be stopped towards the banned countries, banned entities, and so on. So this is what about we are talking about the FATF. Now we are moving towards the bigger entity. Bigger entity here is the UN Security Council formation. So we have talked about the UN sanctions. It's just for a moment I am going towards to explain the UN Security Formation. It is consisted of 15 countries. 5 of them are the permanent members. They have veto power, means they can stop or can veto to any resolution passed by the Security Council and stop it. These countries are written in alphabetically: China, France, Russia, United Kingdom, and United States. So this is what the formation of the, and 10 of the members are generally elected or somewhere join the Security Council by a procedure, and these are generally going to change with the time. So what are the responsibilities of United Security Council? The responsibilities of United Security Council: most responsible in UN Security Council ensure the international peace and security, means all the globe should remain in peace and secure for people. Recommendation admission of new member to General Assembly, because number of countries are increasing with the passage of time. There are lot of liberation movement throughout the world, and some of the countries becoming independent from the bigger states, and these Security Council accept them as a member if they fulfill the criteria. And secondly, approve the UN Charter. The regulation and laws which are changed is being approved, like establish peacekeeping operation throughout the world, remain a world a peaceful place to live, and enacting international sanctions, means international sanctions should be imposed, and authorize the military action if they are needed to ensure the peace in the world. So this is what the major approval changes in charter. So if we are talking about UN sanction regulations, particularly if we are talking about international peace and security related with that, particularly we are talking about the Article 41, Chapter 7, foundation of the Charter, UNO sanction related with many issues. So what are these issues? So number one, if there is any conflict in the world, they want to resolve it among the entities, among the members, so that there should be no chance of war or conflict on the borders. And non-proliferation means if there is spreading a weapon of mass destruction, so they stopped it to not flow throughout the world, and they are being not manufactured on a mass scale, and that will cause a danger for the world. If these weapons are being moved towards irresponsible entities, they may misuse and cause a serious damage to the peace of the world. And counter-terrorism means to stop the terrorism, and similarly the ensure the democracy throughout the world, and condemn the dictatorship, and protection of civilian rights. So these are the basic you can say the issues discussed in this particular article. So this article is particularly related with our sanctions rules or restriction rules. So moving toward the member states, as you know that the UNO resolutions and UNO charter is a mother of all constitutions of the member states. They have to follow all the instructions, all the resolution passed by UNO, and implement the sanctions of UNO approved. For example, number one, member states has to firm own laws to ensure implementation, means their own laws are made in the light of the UNO sanction resolutions, so that their laws locally made, and they are made according to their own culture, their own structure and their own system, but they must ensure that UNO sanctions must be implemented and obeyed. Moreover, even they have firm regulatory body to ensure, so they have to prepare some sort of regulatory bodies, like UNO has, USA has OFAC. Similarly, other countries should form like the anti-money laundering institutions. Similarly, you can say terrorist controlling agencies. Similarly, law and order maintaining agencies. So they must make these sort of institution inside their countries, so that they act and take measures to against the terrorism, to stop funding, to stop support, to stop resource movement towards them. Lastly, ensure finance and other institution work under regulation, so that there should be obviously an environment in which the financial institutions are working under some regulations, under some rules, and that rules and regulations must be implemented, and they are taking all those procedures, all those working, so that the movement of capital and other things are made accordingly. So as for concern, the next we are moving towards UNO preferred targeted sanctions. UNO generally preferred to be targeted sanctions so that minimum civilians and innocent people are hit by the generalized sanctions on the whole country. So after the sanctions committee formed, it is ensured that a committee is supervising and watching out that sanctions are being imposed. These sanctions are imposed to avoid the threat to peace and ensure the security and stability in the world, and ensure that there should be no violation of human rights, and adopt a humanitarian law so that the common people feel that they are living in the safest place. And on the other hand, obstructing humanitarian aid means if there is some sort of humanitarian aid, that should be diverted toward the right direction, what I want to say, and it should not be misused. And recruiting or using children in armed conflict, this is observed in Africa and other countries, that they are using people of age below than 16 and working for the war and in the use for the conflict. So this is also should be condemned and stopped. So these are what we are talking about the UNO targeted sanctions about. So here we have talked about the UNO. So first we have talked about the FATF, then we have talked about the UNO sanctions, and now we have to talk about the US sanctions regulations. So as for concern with the US sanctions regulation, first of all, as for the structure of political structure, or you can say the political institutional structure of America, president can impose the sanctions on with an executive order. This executive order is effective in emergency regulations, and this emergency regulation is approved by the US Congress, and the time of this basic emergency can be increased by the US Congress, and US Congress imposed the emergency, and in this condition the president is able to impose the sanctions on any entity. So if we are talking about particularly the sanctions related imposed by the US president, US Congress can also impose or approve some sanctions on any country. These are the basically the structure of US regulations for the sanctions. As for concern with the another particular institution established in America, particularly for money laundering and sanction regulation, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, we called it popular with the name of OFAC. So if I remember that the US sanctions, particularly Pressler Amendment, that was imposed on Pakistan as well, and according to that amendment, some of aid is being reduced, and on the other hand, US Congress stopped the movement of weapons toward Pakistan, and I thought it's about near about 20 F-16 of Block 52 was stopped for a long time, and it's not provided to Pakistan under this sanction. So anyway, so come back to the point. We are talking about the Office of Foreign Asset Control. So Office of the Foreign Asset Control, agency within the US Department of Treasury, office agency with the US Department of Treasury. You see, this basically agency is working under the Treasury, means the main resources run throughout the country, and this is the agency working under the main body of the main financial body of the country. So, it is responsible for implementing the financial sanctions with the help of other institutions and agencies in the USA, and it can get support from other agencies or can get information from the outside agencies as well. So, these restrictions are for specially designated and for a person, and it has an SDN list, we called it the block person list. When financial institutions are working on a particular financial activity, are transferring an amount from one country to another country, they must watch out the person in the name of the blacklist persons or the blacklist entities, companies, institution and organization. If such entity or person is not belong or not finded its name in the blacklist STN list. If it is in that list, the person who is working on it must report to a senior anti-money laundering officer, and they will go through some procedure and find it out, write down a report and keep it record for that. So, this is what we are talking about the OFAC. Now, the next is primary versus secondary sanctions. Primary sanctions are those sanctions which are implemented, like United States all economic sanction imposed on a country is called primary sanctions. And primary sanctions are generalized sanctions, and then we have to particularly targeting on some particular entity. Under these sanctions, primary sanction and these primary sanctions, secondary sanctions are prepared, and that secondary sanctions are prepared to implement these sanctions. And action impose penalties individual and organization not subject to sanctions US legal jurisdiction are applied against entities prohibited under the primary sanctions. So, we prepare secondary sanctions to ensure the particular entities are controlled under the required need and achieve the objective to stop the flow of resources toward the prohibited entities. So, this is what we are asking about. Another agency is also named as, we can say, Bureau of Industry and Security. We called it BICE. The difference is this, that the OFAC work under the US Treasury, while the BICE work under the Department of Commerce, means it is on the other hand is a practical business side bureau, and OFAC work under the financial institution controlling based. So, anyway, number one is this, that the maintain and denied list. This is also maintaining a denied list. Denied person list means those people who should not be privileged to given any benefit. Their benefits are denied, stopped. And administer the export administration means AIR. So, here is commodities and product list that is being controlled, so that the particular entity being create a pressure on it and stop the activity to doing illegal activities. So, these are the two particular bureaus working popular in USA, privilege, and we are talking about two important terms. First of all is we can say the extraterritoriality. So, extraterritoriality means a country can control and impose sanctions with its geographical boundaries. But if a country, suppose, and it is having influence to control some institution or some entity outside its geographical boundaries, beyond its geographical boundaries, by creating influence and imposing any regulation on it, imposing any law on it, we call this term extraterritoriality. So, extraterritoriality is a legal ability of a country to exercise authority beyond its normal boundaries. This is the ability of the state to make, apply, enforce laws, regulation, and other rules of conduct in respect of person, property, activity, and other beyond its own territory. So, as we have discussed in the beginning, that the success criteria of sanctions, in that we have discussed that sanctions are more successful if it is imposing a country who has 10 times more GDP than the country on whom it is being imposed, and country who is technologically advanced, the country who is being a big country, and other countries giving some special respect to that country. So he can, the particular that country can impose these sort of and get this benefit of extraterritoriality. But somewhere there is a shield used to stop that if being it is done. So this is called the blocking law, and law of one jurisdiction intended to prevent the application of law made by foreign jurisdiction. This is basically if an area is being influenced or being controlled by a regulation of another country, and that is going to hit to another sanction, or the area where the restriction of other countries, likewise here is a US imposing some sanctions on a country or some entity. On the other hand, restriction imposed by European Union, and these are little bit conflicting with each other. So in this situation, blocking statute is prepared and separating that from the sanction from each other, and the area get out of the influence of the other sanctions, so that the one particular controlling authority can work well. Rather, there are two controlling authority working on the same area with different mind and different rules, that will create a conflicting demand. So therefore they decide to give it, and this sort of law is being prepared for it. This is not all times, so when there's a 1 out of the 1,000, it's not usual thing. So anyway, moving towards the next, we are talking about the last entity in our lecture. This is my second lecture of the sanction. The first lecture in which I have covered the initial topics, and in the second I am talking about the restrictive measures in European Union. So as you know that the European Union is not using the term sanctions, they use the term restrictions, although its terminology might be pronounced in a different way, but impact and working is almost the same. So why this is concerned? This is concerned for obviously the international law, means peace and order in the world, and human right protection, and general well-being on humanitarian grounds. This is what the focus or motive behind. So this is prepared by European External Action Service, and it is workable if it is agreed upon or approved by the Council of European Union. It is standard and adopted by common foreign policy, common foreign and security policy adopted it. So it's mean that it's a 3-step process. One is prepared by European External Action Service, approved by Council of European Union, and that then it is used for their common foreign policy and security policy. So This is what the initial. So the list of restriction here is quite resemblance with the others. Likewise, these restrictions are restrictions on the diplomatic movements related with the embassies, visa, and etc. And suspension of cooperation, particularly with the third country. It has to stop the all member countries of the European Union. Boycott of sport and cultural events, so that countries' influences reduce or entities' influences reduce. Trade restrictions, similarly reducing their import and export, so that it hit their economic and financial condition. And financial sanctions means their finances movement is stopped, and flight ban means their airlines are not allowed to fly in their particular fly zones. And restriction on admission of their residents and their nationals. The particular persons who are notorious or who are the culprit in different sort of terrorist activities or financing to the illegal activities. So, European Union is also stressed on the targeted financial restriction in European Union, preferably imposed by European Union, and design means targeted to specific person, group or entity, so that all of the human are not being suffered, all of the human are not being facing some sort of inhumanly situation. So, these are targeted and comprises of asset freezing, prohibition of fund movement and movement of economic resources towards that to create an influence on the sanctioned entity, and it's being stopped to do that sort of activities. So, in this particular video we have covered the popular and the famous sanction authorities, sanction bodies who impose the sanctions. Hope this session is helpful for you, and this is the second session about the sanction, and I will add another sanction video on the sanction, and this will be related on the SDN list and how an institution work on the sanctions and its process is working on it. So, that will be added in my third videos. Thank you very much for joining. Allah Hafiz. So, thanks a lot.